kick that on. And I want to make sure everybody is, are you guys seeing me live? Wave if you hear me and you can see me. I've got my panelists. I've got them muted because I'm going to do the talking here to start with, and just making sure I'm not seeing. I wanted to make sure we're showing up on live. But again, welcome. Looks like a big chunk of our audience is here. We're a little bit over 250 at this point, so that's exciting. Don't get nervous, guys. Like I told you, Purina really stepped it up here. And I want to tell you about one other thing. And Richard, I don't know if you know about this. You could nod if you could do. I've just got invited to be part of a similar series, a two-part series in Canada that Purina Pro Plan of Canada is helping sponsor. And Hope Roberts from British Columbia contacted me, and they're trying to put together a very similar format. I think some of those folks are on tonight, and I promised I would plug that a little bit. The plan is to do their first one on March 30th and their second one on April 6th. So keep your eyes out for that. It'll be interesting to see what the discussion might be different with field trials in Canada, and how that might how what we're doing here might kind of kick into some of the things they're going to do. So that's an exciting thought. And I mentioned a minute ago that I started to ask for advice on what direction you wanted us to go on these on these new Facebook Live Zoom webinar classes, these master classes. And the idea of judging really came up immediately. So I picked three of what I think are some of the most knowledgeable from different parts of the country judges, all good friends of mine. And we're going to have a great lively discussion, and we're going to kick it off here real quick. And I'm going to go ahead and unmute my panelists here and welcome and let them say hello to y'all. And John, you should be unmuted, and Richard, you should be unmuted, and Missy. So we've got, let me introduce them in the order that I'm going to talk to them. And the only reason I've got this order is this is alphabetical order. So Missy Bell from California. It's Novato, California, Missy?
This is correct, yes.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Missy. Why don't you say hi to everybody? And
hi, everybody. I feel it's an honor to be here. Thank you for asking me. Hopefully I can give some insight onto my passion for judging.
Great. We got Richard Dresser from Ontario, and he's in Pavo, Georgia right now.
Hello, everybody. I'm honored to be here. Hello to all my countrymen back there in Canada. And I hope I can be of help tonight.
Awesome, Richard. Thank you. And there we go, Mr. John Russell from Texas.
Good evening, everybody. And I would like to thank Pat and Robin for putting all the effort into this they have, and Purina Pro Plan. More knowledge is always better than less, and we hope this will help you all with what you endeavor to do.
That's great, John. Awesome. And I'm going to explain to everybody a little bit how this beginning format's going to go. I posed two to three different topics for each of the panelists. I'm going to start with Missy, and we're going to just kick a discussion off. We had a talk a little bit over, maybe about a week ago now. A little bit over a week ago. It was a week ago Tuesday, and we just had the greatest discussion about a few different things. And I came up with some ideas on topics that I wanted to kick around with these guys. And boy, we got rolling, and we're an hour into that dialogue. And I thought to myself, we should have just taped this. This was like awesome all in itself. But the energy was great, and we're gonna try to recreate that for everybody at home. And we're gonna kick off. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna mute John and Richard in case the dogs start barking in the background or whatever. And I don't know if everybody at home got a chance to look at the bios of our folks here, but Missy, I really enjoyed my discussion with her, and she talked about how she got started in California, and she started with Chesapeake's, just like me, believe it or not. And we smiled and giggled about that a little bit. And Missy, you described yourself as the minor stake queen. And I really got a chuckle out of that. So I thought to myself, and I asked you the other day, and I sent you this to think about. What advice would Missy of 2021 give Missy from the 90s when you were the minor stake queen? Would you tell yourself something? What kind of insight might you be able to provide yourself or new judges that are where you were in the 90s? And share that with me, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I think in general, when you first start out in the sport, you probably start running your minor stakes, as was my particular case. And I had only run a few and had quite an extensive enthusiasm for the sport. I was at the time training with Barbara and Tommy Williams, who basically did a lot of basics. So I had a lot of knowledge in basic dog training, and only a couple trials when all of a sudden I'm asked, would you like to judge a derby? And I thought, okay, that's fine. I would enjoy it. How do I prepare myself? I got the rule book. I studied all of the faults, and I thought, I'm going to come to the line and watch these dogs and be sure that they are very, very obedient, as they are set out on their task. I think as time has evolved, I have gotten a little bit away from the line, and I have learned to focus more on what is going on out in the field. And I think the best advice that I can give anyone is to study the particular test that you're going to be judging, to run particular tests that you're going to be judging, and learn how to balance what is basically the natural abilities of the dog versus the trained abilities of the dog. And currently what's nice is, in comparison to being just dumped into the program, now we have apprentice programs, which I think are a great asset to anybody who wants to be a judge. You can apprentice all age stakes, you can apprentice minor stakes, and the more that you can do that, the more knowledge you're going to gain. The difference from 2021 versus 1990s is just basically experience. With each and every trial that you judge, you walk away with more experience, more knowledge, you get more relaxed, you become more confident, you know what you're looking for, you know how to place birds. That's it in a nutshell.
And that's really great. I mean, so, and the thing that really made me smile when we were talking is you lit up when you started talking about judging minor stakes today and how fun it is to judge derby dogs. So I started to think to myself, how do you balance rewarding natural ability versus trained skills? Because you think of that classic 2 down the shore, all those kind of trained, disciplined water derby tests that you kind of have to be able to do. But I got this sense by talking to you and listening to you talk that you were really excited about promoting the natural ability, the bird placement, the natural ability thing. What is your, can you, and you mentioned it right there in the beginning about how you used to be about drawing lines and now you pay more attention on what happens into the field.
Well, the drawing of the lines, it's interesting. I had one time a person come up and ask me, Missy, are you judging marking or are you judging the lines? And I said, well, they kind of go hand in hand. If you place water, if you place cover, if you place all of these hazards, not hazards, but things that are going to take courage and perseverance to get through online to the bird, and the dog takes that, you're going to award that dog far better than the one who is going to bail out and still mark the bird just as well. but doesn't have the perseverance or the courage to go straight, at its bird, kind of diverts from it. So the thing that I like mostly about the Derby, though, the thing that is the most exciting to me is that these are young dogs, and hopefully they're fire-breathing dragons, that come up that really want to do the work, and that they haven't gotten so staunch and so scared, in a sense, that they come to the line with apprehension. They want their bird, they want to do their job. To me, their eyesight is the best that it's ever going to be. They're physically the fittest that they're ever going to be, and it's just I love watching them.
So how does being a good Derby judge help you be a good all-age judge?
Well, I think all age versus Derby, of course, is different in the standpoint that, to me, your Derby dogs, you're looking for more of the natural ability versus the trained ability. I think one of the worst things you can do as a Derby judge or as a minor stake judge is detrain a dog and set up a test that is going to detrain them, set up a cheating watermark, or set up something that is kind of like grading nails on the chalkboard. You're just going, ay, 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 as that little dog is running around the water, and that it's going to take you 2 more weeks to get them dialed back in. Where then when you're judging the all-age stakes, you've got trained abilities, you've got blinds, that are important. You've got more memory because you've got your, retired guns and everything. The thing about being a Derby judge and a minor stake judge is you've got 8 stakes that you're setting up. So with the 8 stakes that you set up, you have to be really conscientious about time management. And I think that's probably one of the best things that you do learn when you're judging minor stakes is time management. And there again, the 8 different tests that you have to set up. It's just important to be there during setup and to use a setup dog. And
so you and Richard are judging the Derby National this year. How fun is that going to be?
It's going to be a hoot.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of the best grounds. I mean, the grounds are beautiful. I've judged all age stakes there, so it's going to be fun to go back. It's challenging. Today's dogs are so doggone good, and they're so well schooled and trained. So it's definitely going to be challenging. What I like about the National Derby is they do allow for a retired gun, and they do allow for triples, which I think you can take things that are allowed in a national, and you can actually bring that to a weekend trial too. You don't see it happen yet, but give me a chance to run a local trial or judge a local trial, and I'll be sure to implement something like that.
That's great. I've got one last quick topic that I asked you to think about, and because one of the questions, and it's going to come up, was what advice might you give somebody that wants to start judging? And you started to talk about how much you thought the taking advantage of the Apprentice program was valuable. Would you mind kind of expanding on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, the Apprentice program, I mean, if you ever have an idea that you want to judge, I mean, basically you just go to the club of your choice, and if you see specific judges that are judging and you'd want to approach the chairman or the president of the club and ask them if they wouldn't mind, entertaining the thought with their judges. And if the judges are happy to have an apprentice judge, then by all means jump in. That is, I think, just such a valuable source to have now for anybody that wants to start judging. The thing that I find interesting here in California is the stakes are a lot smaller. We used to have 100 dog opens and 100 dog amateurs. And so then we would always have both Derby quals, minor stake judges. Currently, there's a lot of, it's mostly like you'll be doing a qualifying and an amateur. So you're thrown into the all age stakes quickly, which is why I think, especially out west, it's very important to apprentice your all age stakes. I think someone at one of the questions too, they had asked about resources for judging, and I don't know how popular or how well known the book, the Retriever Field Trial Judging Manual, I think it was actually written mostly by Pete Simons, but that's another good source, of information for reading and preparing for judging.
Well, Missy, we put you on the hot seat right off the bat, so thank you for jumping in and giving us that. I'm going to get back to you with some of those questions that we came up with some of the folks that I've been around. So I'm going to move on to my good friend Richard Dresser. Richard, I just unmuted you.
Here I am.
Hello, Richard.
Hello.
So if you've read Richard's bio, Richard, you started in the 70s?
Yeah.
Did you start in Canada or in the US? Because I know you were right across the border from Detroit and Wolverine.
I actually started in the United States running trials and then moved into Canada because where I lived in Southern Ontario, I was closer to Michigan, Ohio than I was to any Canadian trials. So I started in the United States.
So, when I first got in the game and I first started working and training in Michigan, I got to repeat that. I'm trying to keep on a schedule. That was perfect. I always marveled at your bird placement in natural conditions. And that's what we had in that part of the country. The use of boat birds, which you so rarely see anymore. And I just think of, I always reflect on a particular trial. It was in Illinois on a state wildlife area. And from time to time, their waterfowl refuge would flood. And when it did flood, it was a mass expanse of flooded willows and brush and trees. And it would be, for so many of us, a lot of judges today, would be an incredibly intimidating thing to try to design a test there. And I just, I could almost draw that, quad that you did that was so well thought out. And when we first started talking about this, when I approached you about this, you came up right away about how do we feel the game has changed and where is it going? Do you mind kind of giving me your thoughts on that? Because obviously that was something you've been thinking about.
Well, sure. Back when I started judging, like you suggested, we ran on state grounds. They weren't training grounds, and it was a lot easier to test a dog for perseverance and courage. And now that the game has evolved and we run most of our trials here in the United States, at least, on a lot of the trials are on training grounds that are fairly well manicured, because for the very reason they're used for training. And it is a lot tougher to set up tests to test for perseverance and style and courage and those kind of things on these grounds. I mean, it takes some initiative and some ability to alter your judging to fit the way. And thank God we have these grounds, because we wouldn't be having field trials if we didn't. And thank God to the landowners that make their grounds available for us to have trials on. But as a judge, you have to grow with the sport and adjust your judging and be, for lack of another word, show a lot of initiative to come up with tests to try to test for those same things.
So that was part two of that question, because I said, I know how passionate you were as a judge on finding places to test that natural courage and perseverance. And so what are some things you look for today on some of these grounds where you can accomplish the same thing and not just have it be, sometimes you can make your watermarks just a series of go straight cheating singles, but I don't think that's the direction or the origin you came from. And you had a particularly interesting, challenging test this weekend with an island bird and some things like that. It was probably one of the most difficult last series we've seen in an awful long time. So elaborate a little bit on the things you might look for on these kinds of grounds to reward the things that you like to see 20 years ago.
Well, when I'm setting up marks, I always look at a mark where there's a front, a middle, and an ending. And what you try to do on those marks is put something in there, and you're not always able to do it, but you should try to put something in there in the beginning and in the middle and in the end that's going to play with the dog's how well he marks the bird. Like if you can get them running around a piece of cover or running around a mound or have a little piece of water in the first part where it gets them off their course or takes them their attention off of their destination, then you find out that the dogs that can navigate all that in whatever way and still mark the bird. And you try to do that with every mark. Put something in there to influence their decisions. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes what you put in front of them miraculously helps them get to the bird instead of not get to the bird. But you should always be looking for something to get them to start making decisions on their own early. The more you let the handler, especially in these opens nowadays, have the option of helping the dog, the more they're going to get the dog to the spot. You to the mark. You want to be able to start making the dog have to make decisions on his own as early as you can.
So things that he almost always has to go around and negotiate en route to his destination, that it's not just a matter of going straight. Is that what you're saying?
Right. I mean, a dog with a lot of perseverance and courage might be able to go straight, but some dogs are going to run around that cover and avoid that piece of water. And hopefully you've set the test well enough that if they do avoid that piece of cover or that piece of water, they might not mark the bird. It puts them off in a direction, or they start to focus on another destination, and they don't end up coming up with the bird without a hunt or ending up out in nowhere land.
Okay, I've got one last question for you here before we move on. You talked about the challenge today, and it's always been and I'm talking about the challenge today about dealing with public criticism as a judge. You talked about with the internet and things like that, how if you were fragile, it might really rattle your confidence as a judge. What advice would you give somebody new? Because you know what, you really put yourself out there, and we all know how difficult it is to get that test just right. And it's really easy to look back and tell what you should have done better.
Yeah.
But once you kind of decide what you're doing, you're in. And it's easy for the public to be critical of that. And you kind of brought that up. And for somebody new that is kind of just getting going, that could be a real negative thing and keep them from wanting to judge and be involved. Give me your thoughts on that.
Well, you know, both John and myself and Misty came up in the area as judges when there wasn't any internet or any Facebook or any social media. So by the time that all came along, we had confidence as judges that we could, you know, pretty much deal with all the criticism that was going to come our way. But I have judged, since that came out, I've judged with new people, and it seems like that's one of the big things that concerns them. You know, I watch, you know, you come out, if you judge the open, you come out Saturday morning, and the first thing the young judge says to you, well, I went on Facebook last night and everybody liked their tests, or everybody didn't like the test, or whatever. And I think what you need to do as a judge is you set up the fairest test you can to try to get answers. And if you've done the best job that you can do, you can't worry about what other people are going to say, because there's always going to be criticism. And the thing about social media nowadays is you have people criticizing you that weren't even at the field trial. And you shouldn't even entertain listening to anybody that puts that out there. I mean, just don't worry about, try to do the best job you can do, and worry about the people that are at the field trial that day, and take constructive criticism, but don't listen to nonsense that's on the internet that the people weren't even at the field trial.
Thank you. I'm going to make you go quiet for a little bit. I'm going to jump over to my next panelist, who is now Zoom savvy. He's killing it over there in Texas, John Russell. Hey, John, I'll tell you what, I've known John many years, and he's a great storyteller. So he's going to tell us a story. And I asked John to tell us about his journey as a judge and his journey in field trials, because it's a fascinating one. Back in the East, John, you started describing your bio when you went to your first field trial. Would describe that a little bit and launch into your kind of journey in the sport, mainly as a judge, but how it's evolved you to where you are today.
Well, I went to my first field trial in 1970 and ran my first dog in 72. And as was the case in those days, when I showed up at 20 years old, they said, great, you can go throw a bird. And I got a lot of valuable experience throwing birds, stewarding birds, and all the medial chores that are so important to the game. And I think they give you a good perspective on how hard everybody's working, and to have some appreciation for that. Moving along, I ran my first dog in 72, and I judged my first Derby in, I think it was 74, perhaps. And in those days, much as Missy reflected, it was customary to judge a fair amount of minor stake trials before you ever got to a major stake. And I think it was a pretty valuable experience to come in on the, as an entry-level judge, to come in with the entry-level dogs. With the Derby dogs, the book doesn't ask you to have them honor. It doesn't ask you to have them do blinds. And I think all those things are for good reason. You're looking at unbridled talent, and you should bear that in mind and appreciate it as a judge.
Right, let me unmute. That's great, John. So, oh, did I lose you?
I don't think so.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
So you spoke about developing the importance of developing your own philosophy and style. Would you talk more about that?
Well, I think it's very important as a judge to do tests that you appreciate. They're easier to judge if you can appreciate what you're looking at. So I think you develop your own style about what's important to you within the confines of the rule book. And if you're doing things that you can appreciate, then there'll be things you understand. And the translation of that into your results will be much easier than if you're judging tests that you think might be convenient that you don't appreciate. You aren't going to have that same appreciation of the results in front of you. I think that as a young judge coming up, you don't want to try to emulate anyone. You want to become you. So if I were to have a young judge with me, or Richard or Missy, your job isn't to try to recreate yourself. Excuse me. Your job is to try to develop another good judge who's going to have a different style. So they should come in, see what they see, learn what they can from you. And much like being on a vacation, you shoot 10 rolls of film, get home, get them developed, think about what you saw, keep about 3 or 4 of those for the scrapbook, and throw the rest of it away. And eventually you'll develop your own style, which will be who you are, not who the people that you've judged with that have affected you are.
That's great. I've heard you say that many times, and it really strikes a chord with me about the pictures on the vacation and developing your own style and really making sure that you have people with their own thought process, that you're not just trying to make them think like you. That's really awesome.
And if I could add one thing to that, Pat.
Yeah, please.
And it goes back a little bit to something Richard said about the internet and all that. I never even look at that stuff. But, you know, a lot of people come in and they make a complaint. Well, they're looking at it through their prism, not through yours. I think the diversity of opinion about what's good, what's important, what's not important is a strength of the sport, not a weakness. It's the thing that makes Richard's dog look better this week than my dog did last week, but I'm going to be better next week running under someone with a different philosophy. And so I think that diversity of what's important and what you appreciate is a strength of the sport, should never be interpreted as a weakness. I've lost you.
I got to unmute myself. There we go. You
Okay.
spent a fair amount of time on the rules committee. How has that
Yes, sir.
affected how you judge today?
I don't think it has affected the way I judge today. You know, I was a 40-plus year participant when I went on the rules committee. I think I was pretty well formulated at that point. But it has made me view other judges differently. It's fascinating to me how many people don't know the rule book. I get calls all the time on weekends where somebody's running into something. They'll say, well, what's the rule on that? And when you ask them what the rule book said, they said, well, I don't know, we're asking you. Well, know the rule book. I had one, for example, a couple of weeks ago, and there was some controversy about whether the dog could have a control break in the qualifying on honor. It was really interesting, and it's kind of a simple answer. What does the rule book say? The rule book says you can have a control break in the qualifying. Does it discern a difference between running and honoring? No. So, you know, judge can look at that any way they want to, as they can a control break, period. But, you know, it's like, I don't know the rule book well enough to do that. So I think it's important that people know the rule book. It'll keep you out of a lot of tight little corners.
So, John, you also spoke about the importance of identifying a philosophy of the stake you're judging. Do you mind elaborating on that a little bit?
No, I mean, I think that when you're judging an open versus an amateur, you know, it's easy to say, well, they're the same dogs, they'll do the same things, but the handlers are much different, not just potentially in the skill level, but in their emotional attachment to the dog they're running. I think, for example, and the numbers may dictate it, but you can be a little more calculating about your callbacks in the open than you might be in the amateur, because, you know, the owner is running the dog and he knows his life depends on that dog's success. And, you know, a more lenient view on a callback probably isn't going to cost you anything. And it may just benefit the sport and the owner and the handler. And ultimately your sport gets better, a broader base, more inclusive. And that's not to say that you want to be punitive with the open handlers, but they have a different emotional attachment to what's going on.
That was well put. And again, these are things that we discussed a week or so ago, and you guys have done a great job of kind of recreating that a little bit. John, you got anything else you want to add to this, what we just talked about, or should we move on to some of the questions?
No, move on to your questions. Thank you.
Okay. All right, let me do that. And I'm going to unmute myself. All right. I'm going to ask the first question to Richard. Oh, hold on, let me get it right. I gotta unmute you, Richard.
I'm
So,
here.
Richard, when do you like to see a quick handle and why? Because, you know, I mean, that was like one of those great one of the great lies, a quick handle's better than a long hunt, you know, and oh yeah, but it never seems to be that way. Is there a situation? I mean, talk to me about your philosophy on, and you had a number of dogs handle this weekend and because your test was so difficult. So talk to me about that.
Well, I categorize handles. There's probably 3 different types of handles. There's a good handle to me. Now, again, depending on what the rest of the dog work is like on this particular test, because everything's judged on a curve, right? But say you have a bunch of handles on a test. So now the possibility becomes, well, maybe we're going to call some handles back. So now you have the dilemma of maybe having to decide what are good handles and what are bad handles. So to me, a good handle is a handle where the dog goes to the area of the fall, hunts the bird, and decides he's going to leave the area, and the handler goes beep, puts the dog back into the area onto the bird. That's, as far as handles go, that's a good handle. And the next handle that would down the line is the where the dog goes out in the direction of the fall area, doesn't really get to the area of the fall, beep, the handler puts him in the area of the fall. Okay. And the worst handle is a situation where the dog, you know, heads out on a 90-degree angle from where the marks are, and the handler into nowhere land, and the handler blows the whistle and puts the dog on the bird. You know, so there's degrees of handles, and you have to, when you make the decision as judges that you're going to call back some handles, then that's what you have to start looking at, along with the previous work. If it's the last, you know, if you have previous work to look at, I mean, a significant hunt out of the area of the fall is not going to be back as likely as a handle is going to be back. I mean, they're both terrible, but people need to remember that when a dog's out hunting in nowhere land and they wait too long to put a handle on a dog, now he's got a bad hunt plus a handle. So
Okay.
You don't want to wait too long before you start blowing the whistle and putting a handle on a dog if you want to hope to get back.
All right, I can see all the other panelists. Does anybody else want to chime in on that, or do you want me to move on? Because I think you did a nice job of, but Missy, I saw you start to raise your hand, so let me.
One of the things that I'd like in regards to a handler on a handling or a possibility of a handling test, I think, is to predetermine after they've watched a few dogs when they are going to handle, so that they can actually get a handle. Or you could otherwise just wish your dog into the possibility of handling, but the dog is way too far out of the area to even recover from, I don't want to say the failure, but from their poor navigation. So making that predetermined thought process about when you're going to handle. And that knowledge came to me at a national when someone said, you know, you want to be a finalist. So, you know, watch your dog and know when you're going to handle, so that there's that recovery point.
Oh, I got a question for you, John. Do I have everybody? Okay, here we go. When we talked about this briefly the other morning when I was driving, and the question is, during a blind, if a handler blows a whistle and the dog stops out of sight, and Missy talked about being excited about this question as well, but I'm going to get John to start. Blows a whistle and the dog stops out of sight, and then on its own comes back into sight, waiting for a cast. How would the panel judge that? Would the dogs be dropped, question mark, for failing to make progress to the blind? Or would it be just judged accordingly? All right, hold on. I got to get you to unmute, John. There you
Okay.
go.
I think a couple of things play into that. One is, why would you penalize the dog for coming back to where he can see the handler? He's supposed to see the handler to take a cast. In the rule book, it goes into great detail about how a dog should be visible at all times during the blind. And we all know that that's not possible in today's world, but the same should be true for the dog. If you're going to blow the whistle, he should be able to turn around and see you. If he can't see you and he scooches his way forward 2 or 3 or 4 yards to find you, all I can say is good dog. I think that's important. The intellect of the dogs today is superior to what we once had. I think you should appreciate it and take advantage of that. The total work on the blind is important. And I don't think you'd want to say, well, that dog came forward to get out of that little gully or what have you, or from behind that little hedgerow to see the handler, who may not be familiar with the territory, may not have understood that if he blew the whistle now, he wasn't going to see the dog for a minute. And the thing about progress to the blind is that's something that's worked its way into our vocabulary over the years. There is nothing in the rule book that talks about progress to the blind. It's just something we've manufactured and made gospel. It's not necessarily something that needs to be followed.
So expanding on that just briefly, because we all kind of brainstormed about a possible large traveling judges training clinic, and that discussion came up, and I don't remember who brought it up, but we were all there. And now what was the question that was just described was the dog voluntarily coming back. But at what point, and I don't remember, but it seems sometime in our career, if the handler blew a come-in whistle to bring the dog into sight and finish the blind cleanly, now that is almost an automatic failure. And the reason they say is they're not making progress to the blind. Richard's got his hand up. So these guys are getting excited about this. This will be a good one. Do you want to just expand on your thoughts on that? And I'll jump to, then I'm going to give Richard the next shot at it.
Well, I remember that discussion, and it was about a dog is supposed to get on the point, looks like he's going to get on the point. The last second he pushes off. Would it be permissible to stop and bring him in 3 or 4 yards and cast him onto the point? And it was an interesting discussion. I'm not sure there's a correct answer to that. That's why they call judges the masters of judgment. You know, that's their job to interpret what they've seen and how they felt about it.
Okay, I'm here. Pat, I can't hear you or see you.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't unmute, but I got you there. All right, there we go. I'm working all these buttons here. So you raised your hand. I'm assuming you've got something you'd like to add to that. I'd love to hear it.
Well, right. I mean, I don't see an issue. Like, I agree with John. I mean, because a dog ducks behind a bale or something like that, and the handler blows a little come-in whistle and the dog comes in. No, I'm talking about 10, 15, 20 yards. I'm not talking about a 70-yard come in. That might be a whole different thing. But in the same thing, when a dog goes by a point and you give a little come in and you try to get him up, it's about the total blind. It's not about the degree. It's not supposed to be a glorified obedience trial. It's about trying to get the dog to that bird. And because you blow a come-in whistle, that does not mean you're not trying to make progress to the blind. It means you're trying to get into the position so you can fulfill what the judges asked you to do on this blind. You know, if they asked you to go over the point, that's what you're trying to do.
So you talked about 15 yards. I mean, but in today's world, it seems like if you bring him in 3 feet, it's essentially a failure.
Well, that's what the judges feel that are judging that weekend. They got the book in their pocket. I don't
But it
necessarily
almost,
feel that's
and
right.
Mr. Russell brought it up. I don't know if it just became contagious. I kind of remember that about the time that started to become, but I think a lot of people today just assume that that is absolutely the Bible.
I think that a lot of judges that feel that way probably don't have a lot of confidence in their ability to set up marks that get them answers. So they end up trying to get more answers on their blinds.
All right. All right. Missy, do you want, are you, well, you want to add to this? Hold on, let me get you to unmute. You're smiling.
Well, I guess I just really wanted to comment in regards to the question itself when it was about the dog popping back up over. I mean, that only puts a smile on my face because that just tells me the dog is trying to be a team member. He can't help it if you've blown your whistle too late and he's gone over the side of the hill or something like that and can't see you. And he comes back up to see you. It's just like John said, good dog. And for myself, a come in whistle is a handle just like a cast. I mean, if the dog is coming in on a come in whistle, the dog is being a good dog. And it is, like everyone has said, just trying to get the blind done, trying to get all the factors of the blind. If it's a keyhole and they've missed the keyhole and you want to bring them back in to just respect the blind and get everything done that the judge is asking for, then kudos to the handler, and it's just good dog work. The dog is not going to be dropped in my book.
Let's change gears a minute. Missy, one of the questions was, when would you scrap a test? And you said you'd be comfortable answering that question. Do you mind?
Yeah, no, I don't mind. I think if the test basically is too hard, say you have a field of 40 dogs and you've had 15 dogs in a row that has failed your test, I personally don't want that. I want to be able to score dogs on marks. And if they're just having such a great difficulty in getting the job done, then let's look at redoing it. Scrap a test if there's going to be a hazard that maybe you haven't seen. The minute a dog falls, boom. In my book, if it can't be fixed in the field, then you just get done with it. What else? I think that's basically it. If it's too easy, if it's too hard, if the test becomes unfair for whatever reason you hadn't looked at, and the safety factor.
Yeah, you think of those situations where you get that wind shift and all of a sudden you got a long test. You've seen it happen at nationals, and all of a sudden dogs can't hear the whistle.
Well, and you just never know. The most important thing, I think, too, like even as chairman of a trial, if you've got your judges that are out in the field looking, just also direct them to an optional field, like I say, in case you have to scrap, have this in the back of your mind, because it happens. It just happens.
Okay, I'm going to jump to John on a question. John, I got an interesting question regarding challenging the line to the blind. If a retriever, do I have everybody? Okay. If a retriever was a few yards offline and never actually touched the line to the blind, and I'm even going to say one of the kind of words you hear today, he never crossed the line to the blind. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that in a facetious way. I'm just saying you hear that. But was otherwise maintaining progress towards a blind and picked the blind up cleanly. At what point do you decide that the handler did not sufficiently challenge the blind? Is it a concern to you that the retriever has never actually touched or crossed the line to the blind?
Well, in the scenario as you describe it, he was close to the line. I mean, I believe that if you've crafted your trade as a judge and you've watched dogs run, you get a feel for, the dog's effort, the handler's effort. And I'm not sure you want to box yourself in with a bunch of silly little rules. In this day of connect the dot blinds, as I like to call them, I think the big hard moving dog that's, going 100 miles an hour at that blind and stays 3 or 4 yards offline, so what? I mean, did you like what you saw as a judge? Did you think the dog was presenting himself to the hazards you set in his way? If you do, good dog.
So you take into account, and I think of this when I'm, as a handler, I always ask myself, why did this judge set up this blind? What are his hazards? And out of respect to his test, if I challenge his hazards, like you described, even if I didn't necessarily cross the line multiple times, I feel satisfied most of the time, and that suited me well. Go ahead.
And I think that's very important. Did he do your blind as you presented it? I mean, if he was 10 yards offline to one side and then ended up 10 yards offline to the other side, and then back and forth 3 or 4 times, well, he crossed the line plenty. But was it as pleasing to you as a judge to watch that performance, or the one who was fighting the crosswind the whole way and didn't have to be handled?
Anybody else want to jump in on that one? All right, Richard. Go ahead, Richard.
I feel it's not about being tight to the line. It's the total blind. And like John says, it's the performance of the dog. And some dogs, you might get a slow moving dog, and he's going to take every cast and be close to the line because he doesn't go fast enough to get himself in real trouble. Now you come up here with a really stylish, hard moving dog, and he might cross the line 3 or 4 times. He might be 10 yards off. When you blow the whistle, he might turn and be 6 or 7 yards offline. But as long as the dog makes progress to the blind, I mean, that's what the rule book says. Blinds weren't meant to be again, I keep going back to this, a glorified obedience trial, but sometimes that's what they can become. They're there to see, blinds are there to see if the dog will stop, handle, and take a cast and get to the end of the blind. That's what they're there for.
All right, this leads me into a different question now, real quick. And then because you talked about this, and the question is, what are suggestions you might have to help advance a judge? And I'm going to prompt you with this because I'd like you to expand upon it. You talked about your time shooting birds and throwing birds and watching dogs from the field perspective. And I thought that was a great insight. Would you mind reflect or talking about that a little bit, Richard?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that helped me out immensely when I started out, and John alluded to it a little bit too, is getting out there in the field and shooting flyers and throwing dead birds and sitting there in a chair and watching the dogs come to you and see what influences their direction and what hazards they'll dip around and what their eye movement and what they're looking at. Nothing teaches you more about seeing what influences a dog in his direction than being out in the field and watching them come at you as opposed to being behind them and watching them go out. And the other thing is judging teaches you more about being a good handler than anything else. I mean, sitting back there watching people handle, the good handlers handle, and what the dogs do with the way they move them around. I mean, that can teach you more about being a good handler, judging. So, I mean, if you want to be good at judging or being a handler, you need to get out there and volunteer and be out there in the field, throwing birds and watching what's going on out there in the field.
Good stuff, Richard. I'm going to jump to Missy because she talked about watching. You were training with Bill. You talked about being with Billy Sargenti and training with him, and how valuable watching an advanced crew of all age dogs and learning and just watching dog behavior. Would you elaborate on that a little bit for us, Missy?
Well, I think, I think I spent 9 years with Billy, and it was like it was an everyday occurrence. And I went and learned everything I just attribute a lot of everything that I know to him, because he was not a verbal teacher, but he was a watch and learn teacher. And you needed to observe everything that he did, from the setting up of the tests. And then what I liked the most was you would have 30 dogs that would do the test in different fashions. And I think watching how each dog would build on the test and how each dog would handle the test helped you with bird placement, helped you with orchestrating tests. John said something that I thought was interesting when we had our discussion before, and he thought when you go to a field, you of course don't go to a mound, and you don't go to an area that a pro dogs truck can get to. He said, but you go to the field and you try not to mimic necessarily a training test. And this was something that Billy also taught me, is that even being that this is a training test, it's a training test. That doesn't make it a good field test or a good field trial test. So it was a wonderful advantage to be with him during the time that I was, that's for sure. And then just before that, I was able to spend time with Rex. And then of course, like I had mentioned earlier, Tommy Williams, who was probably the master of young dog basics, just really fabulous trainers.
That's great stuff. Thank you. So I'm going to jump over to John here. So John, do you want to, I guess that our Richard talked about being in the field. Missy talked about training and watching a lot of advanced dogs. Tell me your thoughts on that a little bit. Do you have anything you can add to that?
Well, I agree with both of them on those things. And I think that one of the things I've enjoyed over the years is being exposed to different trainers. I spent quite a few years with a fellow named Pat Burns, and have been able to train with, whether it be pre-national or under other circumstances, with a lot of other people, from Backdoor to watching Wayne Curtis and watching Rex Carr and lots of other people. And I think that watching the different styles, different objectives, what's important, gives you a good perspective, a good spectrum, if you will, on dogs and their performances and what makes them tick, and maybe even what makes the handlers tick. And I think all that would go a long way to help you. I think that one of the things that people do is they've tried to make a science out of this, when it's really more of an art form, which I think goes back to the conversations about making progress to the blind and being online, those sort of things. I think that's trying to be very technical in the approach, rather than appreciating it as a sports performance, an art performance, which I believe is really more intentional to what we want.
That's great, John. So you mentioned something earlier. You talked about the dog breaking on the honor in the qualifying stake. Somebody asked, and there must be some confusion. They want to know what is considered a controlled break in the minor stakes. And they went on to say, particularly with the use of the word no. Now, I don't know if they thought if you said no when they broke and called them back, that was different than saying here. Is there anything that you can't do short of touching your dog on a controlled break?
That's right. You can't physically restrain them. And if you go to the rule as written for a controlled break, it talks about stopping them in a reasonable proximity. It doesn't tell you that it has to be in 3 yards, 5 yards, and it doesn't dictate what is permissible to say. We think of the word no as being taboo. We also, because we get all age oriented, we also think of breaking as taboo. And clearly in this situation, it's not. What's the difference between here, heel, no, sit? It just talks about stopping the dog in a reasonable distance.
Somebody asked, what are some good judging resources you like? Do you have anything in particular? Is there anything in print? I assume that's what they're talking about.
Yeah, the rule book.
I figured you'd say that. Oh, what is Missy's on?
Well-
What? Oh, hold on. There we go. I'm gonna let Missy jump in on that one. She's holding something up.
Well, this was written in 2005, and I'm not real sure about, actually 2006. I'm not real sure where you get this or even how I got this, but it was Pete Simons. He was the major contributor, and I just find it to be, it was good airplane reading material.
Well, that's great. Well, you guys have had that right on cue.
It's a lot easier than trying to navigate this.
Oh, John needs to, hold on, I'm gonna unmute him. Go ahead, John.
Well, let me say that I watched Pete Simons orchestrate that book, and he basically was the editor and organizer, and the materials came from many, many people around the country, and he brought it in, and he did a great job, and it was a great service. But you do have to be a little careful, because there are a few things in there that ideologically conflict with the book. Don't find yourself in a tight position. I recently had someone you would know well say to me, you need to redo that judge's manual. There's 5 questions in there that would get you a wrong answer on the judge's test. Well, that's not the document you study for those things. It's very helpful. It's useful for a lot of things. You need to be familiar with the rule book.
Good stuff. All right, I'm going to jump to Richard with a question here. Oh, wait a minute. He's raised his hand. Do you want to, you got something to say about that, or you want the next question?
Yeah, I want to comment on the no issue, and I totally agree with John, but what people have to keep in mind, it's not so much what you say, it's the demeanor you use when you say it. You have to be careful, because there's also the rule, and John, you correct me if I'm wrong, but there's also the rule in the rule book that you shouldn't act in an intimidating manner. And you have to be careful about, you can't be screaming and hollering in an intimidating manner, or some judges might throw you out for it. So if you're going to say no, but try to say it in a voice that isn't going to be overly intimidating, because some judges could consider it as intimidation. And you know,
There's a guy that all
John,
three of us, someone all three of us know might not have ever been able to even run a field trial. Old Jack Martin, if that was the rule.
right.
I mean, every word he said sounded intimidating, but that's the way Jack communicated. I mean, he talked like that to everybody.
Well, you have to, am I still on? You
Yeah.
have to remember that even though Jack sounded that way, his dogs never paid any attention to him when he did scream like that. So, you know, you have to look at the dog and what the dog does when the person is yelling and screaming. And if the dog isn't worried about it, then the judges don't need to be getting worried about it, I guess.
So if the dog cringes,
Rich,
it's intimidating. If he doesn't, it isn't.
Yeah.
I think
Exactly.
I think Richard makes an important point, Pat, in that no matter what they do, if it makes the judge fall out of his chair, it might not be permissible. And by the way, Richard, I would never correct you.
Okay, I got one more. I got a question for Richard here. Hold on a minute. That's not, I just had it up here. All right. What is your standard for awarding green ribbons? Is it based on if you would call the dog back for the 5th series, if there were one, or just for finishing the 4th without handling or totally failing? And does the standard vary by stake?
Most certainly it varies by stake. As John alluded to earlier, if I was judging the open stake, I'm a lot more careful about awarding jams. For one thing, it could be the difference between making a dog a qualified all-age dog or not making them a qualified all-age dog, and that is important, you know. And The other thing is, professionals and a lot of the people running the open stakes, feelings don't get hurt as much. But when you're trying to promote a sport like ours, I think it's important to try to hand out jams in the minor stakes, especially, and in the amateur stake too. You know, like this weekend, we awarded everybody that completed the 4th series a jam because it was such a hard test. And, you know, and we had some double handles that we gave jams to. And we had some handles that got placements. So again, it depends on the test. It depends on the stake. It depends on a lot of things, you know, whether you really enjoyed watching that dog that day, you know, but he just didn't quite get there, you know. I mean, I think you have to keep your mind open to giving jams, at least in the open stake, maybe so much, but definitely in the amateur and the minor stakes for sure. In the open stake too. I mean, those pros like to get a jam so they can call their client and say, well, we didn't get any color, but we got a green ribbon.
Good stuff. I want to let Missy. Missy, you want to comment on that? Oh, I asked you to unmute. You may not have unmuted yet.
Oh, there. Okay, minor stake jams. The more the better. I think that's where the sport is needing to continue and to be encouraged. You know, the new people starting out in the Derby, they're going to, I remember I got my first jam on the first Derby that I ran and I cried. So it's very emotional. And what does it hurt? So carry as many dogs as you can, jam as many dogs as you can. We encourage that every weekend. In the all age stakes, when I have judged all age stakes, I feel that if a dog has come to the 4th series, to that particular point, they've been demanding. If they complete the test, even with a handle, it doesn't hurt to jam them. A double handle might be a different consideration. In the open, I still feel the same way. You know, the tests have been difficult enough that completing the 4th series would give them a judge's award of merit.
That's good. I'm going to ask one last question here, and then I'm going to let you guys give any parting thoughts you might have. Missy, describe your favorite judge. I mean, just the vision of your favorite judge. You know, like some people say, boy, I love that guy because he has really hard tests, but really generous callbacks. Or I like somebody that some of these judges now, I mean, I've seen it where they'll diagram their perfect line to the blind and be totally clear. But give me a description or a vision of what you would describe as your favorite judge.
Basically, I think a person who has a passion for the sport, who makes you feel comfortable as a contestant, who doesn't necessarily bother you when you're running. I like to be able to focus on my dog and not necessarily on the conversation. I also like the judges to be watching the dogs continuously and making notes continuously. I don't particularly like it when they're talking to the next contestant or maybe not seeing how well my dog pinned that bird. And I like a person to be generous in callbacks. I like them to be sensitive to the amount of time and effort and emotion that you've put into the dog. I don't like a person whose ego gets in the way of doing a good job.
So Missy, I would sense, I've not run under you, but I would sense you just described yourself as far as being the person you'd like to, because I would sense you'd be somebody fun to run under, your enjoyment of watching the dogs and exciting about how a test is working. Some of my favorite judges were guys that you could theorize about, all right, what do you think would have happened if we'd have done this kind of thing? And you're really talking about the love of the sport. And it's obvious when I watch you and listen to you talk that that's the way you are. So Thank you for doing that. And does anybody else want to kick in a thought on that, or should we go into, because we've already gone over our time. I'm going to go ahead and unmute the whole gang and let you chime in on anything you feel like you want to. All right, Richard, go ahead.
One thing that Missy brought up earlier, and that I think we maybe didn't spend enough time on, and that we should, is time management.
Great stuff.
It is so important as a judge to control the things that you can control yourself, like time it takes to get the next dog to line, the time it takes you to call the numbers, and anything that you can save time on, you should. Like, really look at how you can control the rebirds and keep everybody in a flow, because the more time you have, you can be more permissible with your callbacks. You can set up tests that you can test them to get better results if you have because you have more time to put a bigger test in. It really controls how well the field trial and your stake is going to run when you can control the time management that you can. I mean, it's so important.
That's a great point. And that's, especially you guys that have been involved with nationals, you've really learned the value of time management, and it's obvious when you see you judge on the weekends. Mr. Russell, you got anything you want to add to any of this?
Well, I think one of the things I would say that follows in what Richard was talking about is that you have to know that if you let dogs hunt endlessly at the beginning of a stake, that you may be making lighting prohibitive for the poor dogs at the end. So when you're doing that time management, it falls into not only finishing the stake or what have you, but are you going to be able to finish that test tonight, or are you going to have to come set up in the morning for 10 dogs because you frittered the time away earlier on? So I think that there's many aspects of the time management, many penalties to be paid if you don't pay attention to it. I think that that's important. I think that I would like to go back to the jams, if I could, just for a second. One of the first fellows I ever judged with, who was a great guy named Hugh Claren, said to me, don't worry about if they call him back for the 5th series. We aren't having a 5th series. So was it a meritorious performance? Judge it solely on that part. Give them a green if you thought they showed great merit in their overall performance through 4 series. If you thought they failed, typically at the end because you wouldn't have had them there, then they probably shouldn't get that. And there are a lot of reasons that went into that, but make it about a meritorious performance. Not, if I had River Oaks Corky, I would have won. I didn't have River Oaks Corky. So stay away from the illusions.
Guys, Richard, go ahead, buddy.
Well, John just brought up a good point about watching dogs that are hunting forever. And one thing, when you have a handler in front of you and his dog's running all over the place, what is the best approach to, cueing them in that it's time for them to make a decision? And I've tried a bunch of different methods over the years, and some of them may have been in the beginning too harsh, and some of them, and you have to judge it on, if you're judging an amateur stake, how new the person is in front of you. But usually what I say to people now is, when I've seen enough, I'll say, do you want us to have the gunner come out and help your dog? And kind of clue them in that way. I mean, it can be very traumatic in an amateur stake for people when they're trying to get a dog through a test, and they're out there hunting their behind off, and they're trying to get through it, and so you have to be a little diplomatic, and I found that for me that works the best.
Richard, kind of on that particular note, I think if you were to say, would you like would you like us to help your dog or would you like to handle? So, give them the option.
Right.
It's like, yeah, give the option.
Well, I'll tell you what, guys, thank you so much. I've kept you a little bit too long, maybe not. The only thing that would have made this better was if, I know if I was with John and Richard and probably Missy, we'd be having a glass of maybe some bourbon and this would go on for a couple more hours. And
You're here to that.
and that's just the way we've done this over the years. It's been an evening like this, and that's what these master classes and some webinars have been like, just great discussions with old friends about the sport that we love and have dedicated our life to. And I thank you guys for doing the same and being here and sharing your great knowledge with everybody. And I think it went fabulous. I hope everybody at home enjoyed it. And thanks again to Purina and Ray Vogt and Carl Gunzer and everybody for supporting. And I can't wait to see you guys soon. And good night to everybody.
Good night. Thank you, Pat and Robin.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.